There are a couple of little elements on the map front and I want to incorporate them into the front of the journal. So I'm going to take this and this, I'm going to cut them out, and I'm going to use my gesso, I think, to dumb them down and deaden down those colours, but let's see how they look when they're cut out. Actually, with this one I may not need to. That already lends itself quite well to the colour scheme, so I'll have a little play around and see where I think that might look nice and see where that might fit. That might go on there, or it might pop in under some of these elements, so we'll have a little play. Let's see. That's one, and then the other one is this one, which is a little map that shows you the area covered by the map on the inside. These are all little unexpected bonuses, because when I was looking at the map, when I had it all sort of spread out in front of me, I was looking at it from the point of view of how I could use it to create signatures within a journal, and I didn't really think about the elements on the front that could be used inside. That might even go on the outside. So I've got two lovely little pieces of ephemera that I can begin to populate my journal with, and there are some other things that I think I can use. So for example, there are some little things in here that explain what the national grid is, what the reference system is, and these will make nice tags. So I can cut both of these out, and I could keep them together, or I could cut them in half, and I could glue something on the back if I wanted, or I could just leave it like that, and I could tuck them into one of my little tuck spots, of which, as we've just seen, there are many. Lots of opportunities for using those. Plus I have all of these bits of the map left over, again with that lovely canvas backing, which I absolutely love. And I've got lots of pages from my map that I could use to make tags, and of course I still have this page here. I thought I could, maybe I can just pull that off. Yes. So again, I can make some tags out of this. It's a nice strong card. It will do ideally, and it adds a greater sense of vintage appeal to the journal. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some more of my fabric that I used to line the inside of it. I really like this fabric. I also have some burlap, and I have some more of my blue ribbon, and I'm going to be adding lots of fabric to the top and the sides of these. I deliberately left myself plenty of space at the top and down the sides, so that when the journal is closed I've got space to add in loads of tabs and things like that without them being crushed, you know, by sticking outside of the journal. So, sticking outside of the journal? I'm gibbering now, aren't I? But you know what I mean. So they will be protected if they can be contained within the journal, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to have a play around with a few things like that, and then I will come back and I will show you what I've done, and hopefully that will give you some ideas yourselves. Do you remember our palette of colours and textures? Well, I'm going to show you how I've been using these to advance my journal. I wanted to add lots of interest at the top. Do you remember I said that I left myself plenty of room around the outside so I could do extra things? Well, here is an example. On the tops of many of these pages I've put some tabs. Each tab is ever so slightly different, using a combination of this here, this is a sort of burlap, and the blue ribbon and the lace. And I've done different combinations of them. I've also used some more of the fabric, the nice fabric that I used to create this inner lining for our journal cover. And all I've done is I've layered them. So I've taken a piece of ribbon and a piece of burlap and I've just folded them over like that. I've folded them over the top of the page and I've used just a tiny little staple to hold it in place. I've done a couple of staples on each side so that I know they're in there nice and firm. When I open the book out, there's lots of interest, not just on the inside but along the top as well. And the other place where I've added some tabs and I've used my palette is in the back of the book. I've added 2 little tags. I'll show you how to make these, but this first one helps me open out that signature, and the second one helps me open out the back signature. So it just clues me in as to where to pull these, because there's so much going on in this journal that I ended up trying to open the wrong page, and I thought these would be a good way to do that. And I'm going to show you how to make those little tabs next. I'm starting with a strip of white card. It's about 4 centimetres deep, and I'm using an original tag as a template. This will make it easier for me to create a tag without having to use a die cutter, for example. I'm using a pencil to mark off the edges, and I'll cut the edges, and then I know I've got something that is approximately correct for a tag, and it's based on this, so that's fine. Then I'm going to ink up my stamp. I'm going to use one of the soft colours from my palette that I know will make a nice background. So I'm using Polar Blue, and I'm going to take the Polar Blue and I'm going to add it over an area of my lettering stamp where the text is particularly dense. Then I can take my tag and press it into my lettering stamp, and there will be a little gap at the end, but that's okay. I'll just ink up another little bit of my lettering stamp and make sure I get it. I don't really want it to overlap if I can, so about there. And this is just for background, so I don't need to be too concerned about it. Now that I have my tag, I want to add a little hole. So I bring in my original card again, and I'm going to use my pencil just to make a little mark so I know where I want to add a hole. And I'm going to use this massive beastie, a crocodile, to add the hole and then add the eyelet. And I want to add a stamped image. So I go back to my palette and I say what will look nice on top of that soft background. So I'm looking for strong colours, and there are 2. There's cornflower blue and there's potting soil. For this I'm going to use cornflower blue, and I have a little stamp of a bird, which I think is quite nice, and I don't get as much use out of it as I would like to. And just pop my bird on there. And then to complete the tag, I've got 3 little elements, and again they're taken from my texture palette. I'm going to add a little bit of glue on the end of this tag, and I'm going to stick those into position. And I think we'll have the ribbon at the end and a nice bit of brown paper, and then I'll pop the lace over the middle of both of those. Ideally you would wait until these were dry, but it's not an ideal world and I'm impatient, so I'm just going to cut them off. That gives you a very nice little tag that ties in with everything that you're making, your colour scheme and everything in your journal. I've got a piece of lace here and I've poked it through the hole, through the little eyelet that I made using my pokey tool. And I've also got a nice piece of blue smoky coloured twine. This is beautiful. I forgot I had this and I was digging around for some kind of wool. I thought I might find some wool or some thread, and I found this twine and it's in the ideal colour. And all I'm doing now is tying the lace in place with the twine. It gives it a slightly different finish. I think that's rather sweet. And then that is ready to be added into your journal. Here he is. Here is a little visitor. He's come to craft with me. Little Buster dog. Hey Boo. Buster. What's this up here? Buster. Buster. Hello, darling. We've survived the craft mat invasion by the dog, and I wanted to show you a couple of other nice little embellishments that you might want to add to your journal. So these are a couple of examples. It's a piece of plain craft card. There's a pale fabric on the top, and it's stamped with just an image of whatever you have. So I used a little bird earlier on those tags. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've got a foliage stamp which I'm going to stamp onto the fabric, and then it's just layering up little bits and bobs that that are matched with your colour palette and your texture palette. So I've started by cutting 2 pieces of card, and I've got 2 pieces of fabric that will fit on the card, and I'm going to add a little bit of interest and change these a little by just ripping away some of the threads along those outside edges. I've always liked this look. It just adds something different. You don't need to rip off loads, just make sure that it will fit on your piece of craft card. Now that I've roughed up both of my pieces of fabric, I'm going to stamp on them. I'm using my potting soil, which is one of my colours from my colour palette. And just use any stamp that fits in with what you want to do. This is a nice foliage branch. And when you're stamping onto fabric, just give the stamp an extra moment to give the ink time to just penetrate down into the fabric. There we go. I think that's rather pretty. And for the second one, I think I'll do the bird that we used earlier. That would be nice. In fact, let's have a couple of these. I'll give it a moment to settle. My images are stamped up and ready to use, but before I do anything about sticking them onto the background, I want to add a little bit of colour just around the outside border. You can use foam, you can use whatever you fancy using. I use these here. These are oral mouth swabs. Sounds horrible, very, very practical, very, very cheap. I've used these quite a lot in previous videos, you might have seen them. And you buy about 100 for about £10 online. I'll provide a link for these. So I'm going to just take one of my swabs and I will go around the outside edge of my cards. I find these swabs are very good as well if you want to apply glue, because you can just dispose of them. You don't need to worry about washing them out. And this one I've used quite a lot, so little bits of fluff will begin to come off them. But I think these are really pretty useful things to have. They both had their edges darkened down. The next thing I want to take is a piece of paper. This is just a printed piece of paper from one of my books, a sacrificial book, specifically bought for these sorts of purposes, for making journals. I like using second-hand old books. I think it gives them another lease of life, and I like to think that if I was that book, I'd be really pleased that I wasn't just being left on a shelf and that someone was getting use out of me. Or that's how That's how I tell myself it is if you're a book on a shelf. So these are just to add a little bit of extra texture and interest. And now I can begin layering these up. I'm going to add a tiny little, actually I'm not going to use that one, I'm going to add a tiny line of glue because I want to hold these in the centre of my card, my craft card, because I'm going to take them to the sewing machine. I'm going to have to do this off camera, but I'm going to add some just lines of stitching as I have done on these ones. So on these ones I've done a zigzag stitch and a straight stitch, and I've done a couple of straight lines down either side and a zigzag across the top, and it's another of those things that adds texture, which I really like. And I'm going to add my little pieces of paper. These don't need to be anything special. Don't worry about this. This is a fun thing. This is something you just crack on and you do, and you don't stress about it. I'm going to add, I've got some of my texture from my card, so I've got a piece of the blue ribbon and I've got a piece of lace which matches with what I have here. And I think with this one, let's see, let's layer this up differently. Let's layer this up a little bit more like that. Yeah, I think that'll be good. So this one I will need to add a little spot of glue to. I'm going to I'll put my burlap that way I think, and my lace just dangling down from that. Oops. I'm not giving this very long to dry at all because I'm trying to show you this quite quickly. I'm going to add some paper along the top of this one, make that a little bit different again. So I'm going to take these to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch them. I'm actually going to use a blue stitch because these have been done in brown thread, and I've got my machine ready with a little bit of beautiful soft blue thread that will match with these colours. The stitching added down here now. I hope you can see that lovely soft blue on the camera, and a little bit down here. I've also added a button here because it again ties in with my palette. So all I've done is I've taken a button that's got a couple of holes in it, I've put the same thread through here that I used to sew in the signatures, and it goes well through the buttonholes because it's thick, but it's not so thick that it won't go through the little holes. And then I'll just snip off the little bits. I'm going to pop this one, I think I'm going to stick this one about there. If you want you can sew these through, but I'm quite happy to glue them. So there you have 4 sweet little embellishments that will fit in beautifully with the rest of your journal. I hope those little things appeal to you, and I hope that you'll be able to join me for the next part as we pull our journal together with all of these lovely embellishments and things that we're making. So until we meet again, take care.